Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Partners in Mission and another one of our strategic partners sponsored webinars. Delighted with such a great turnout from all over the country on an important topic that we all need to certainly focus on, that is our school's endowment. We'll let everyone get settled in here. My name is Larry Furey, the founding partner at Partners in Mission. And we have a great panel today to share with you with one of our strategic partners, Catholic Investment Services. As I said, we have a wonderful turnout coming from all over the country. So welcome. If this is your first webinar with Partners in Mission, we are a consulting firm based in Boston, Massachusetts. We work with Catholic schools and Catholic dioceses all over the countries. And delighted to welcome so many new faces as well as so many familiar faces with us. This webinar is being recorded, so we will make it available to you following the completion of the webinar. Again, lots of people are coming in. Welcome to every of you. Thank you for taking time on a busy Wednesday, I'm sure, as we approach the end of the fiscal year and graduation activities and end of school year activities. But we really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us this afternoon. So as people get settled in, why don't we start and just from all of us at Partners in Mission, certainly as we approach the end of what has been a challenging school year for all of us, know that all of us on our team continue to have you and your family and your team in our prayers. We certainly continue to pray for peace, not just in our country, but throughout the world, particularly in the Middle East with what's going on there. So I will now introduce Zela from Catholic Investment Services, who will kick off our webinar and introduce our other panel members. So Zela, thank you so much for your partnership and being with us on this webinar on how an endowment can strengthen our Catholic institutions and our Catholic schools.
Thank you so much, Larry, and welcome everyone to this webinar hosted by Partners in Mission and Catholic Investment Services. Thank you for joining us today. As Larry said, our topic is how an endowment can strengthen your Catholic institution. My name is Zela Astarjian, and I'm privileged to serve as a managing director at Catholic Investment Services. My colleague, Jeremy Taylor, is with me today and on the Zoom control panel, and he'll be conducting the Q&A session at around 40 past the hour. The format today is conversational, and we really would like to have an open discussion with all of you involved with Partners in Mission community. So please use the Q&A function to ask any questions. Our audience is muted and the program is being recorded and will be available for replay on the webpage of our CIS Institute. Enormous thanks to our all-star panel, who you will meet shortly. Catholic Investment Services was founded by some of the investment industry's most respected leaders to address the investment challenges faced by Catholic organizations. We are a Catholic nonprofit serving other Catholic nonprofits, and hope this webinar provides some useful take-home value. So now let me introduce the panelists. Paulita Pike is Catholic Investment Services board member and partner in the Chicago offices of the law firm Ropes & Gray. She also serves as an adjunct professor of law at Northwestern and also the University of Notre Dame Law School. Paulita is passionate about the arts and giving back to her community. She serves on several nonprofit boards, including the Shakespeare Theater and the Art Institute of Chicago. She is also a member of Ropes & Gray's Diversity Committee and a frequent speaker at various industry conferences. She's also a Notre Dame grad. Tim Sullivan is also another Notre Dame grad. He's part of the Partners in Mission community and is completing his 5th year as president of Bishop Feehan High School here in Attleboro, Massachusetts, which is part of the Diocese of Fall River. Tim is a graduate of Feehan and is the parent of 4 Feehan students. And he's currently, and presiding over a capital campaign, which we will talk about later in the program. So he can share his experience with you. Dr. Marco Clark is also part of the Partners in Mission community, and he's worked as a Catholic educator since 1989. In 1997, he was appointed principal of his high school alma mater, Bishop McNamara High School in Forestville, Maryland, which was founded by the Congregation of the Holy Cross in 1964. In the summer of 2020, he was named the first lay executive director of the Holy Cross Institute at St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas. Throughout his career in education, Dr. Clark has served on a variety of advisory and governing boards, commissions, and task forces. With an expertise in leadership development and succession planning, Dr. Clark was invited to serve on the National Catholic Educational Association Leadership Advisory Board in 2016. Thanks again to our exceptional panel. Now, let's get this show on the road. So my first question is for Paulita. Paulita, what is the importance of an endowment, and what is an endowment, and how should it be structured, and what are the benefits of an endowment?
So an endowment, in the simplest of terms, of course, is a collection of funds, of monies. And it's part of a bigger picture and a key component of both an operating budget as well as a tool for maintaining and hopefully growing capital that can be used not just for day-to-day operations, but also for special projects. With respect to operations, the endowment serves to supplement funds that are already allocated to operations sort of on a year-to-year basis. With respect to special projects like buildings or scholarships or hiring additional staff or anything along those lines, the endowment can be an important source of funding, but also of fundraising. An endowment that is well run allows an organization to tout the fact that any donation and fundraising will benefit from future growth, and that in fact that contribution can grow exponentially over time.
That's excellent. Marco, did you want to add anything from your perspective? And also, could you cover this notion of being need agnostic at one point, maybe later?
Sure. Yeah. And Paulita's response was fabulous. So really not much to add to that. I think we have to remember that an endowment is a long-term resource for planning, for viability, for sustainability, very similar to our own personal retirement funds, right? We need to set aside some of today's resources in order to provide for the future. And, there's always a tension about how much to spend, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later, and how much to save. But unlike our retirement fund, the endowment, which is primarily from accumulated gifts, is managed by a board of trustees and has to be spent according to the directions of the donor. For example, in the case here at St. Edward's University, 80% of our endowment, which is about $110 million, 80% of that is donor restricted, right? The other 20% is board designated. And we'll get into the real value of that as well a little bit later on. But I think we have to recognize the importance of it as a long-term resource, and not to be afraid to begin, right? Just to get started. I think even as I throw out a number like I did for the university here, that's a university endowment. But in my years as a high school president, we started from zero. And we have an endowment there that is continuing to grow at Bishop McNamara High School. It's one that I'm proud that we got it to where it is today, somewhere in the $8 million range. But it started from scratch, and we just had to be disciplined and make a commitment to get that started.
You're right, and different schools are at different stages of development, right, and endowment campaigns. So maybe, Tim, at this point, if you don't mind telling us about your experience. I know you're in the middle of a capital campaign, and can you share your story, what led you to start on this capital campaign, and can you also tell us a little bit about the challenges. Like you, when we were prepping for this call, you were talking about the sister school down the street. Can you tell us
Yeah.
how that ended up?
Yeah, I think, Paulita and Marco mentioned a lot of great, I guess they're adjectives, right? Sustainable. I even think stable. We're at the zero mark where Marco was maybe 15 or 20 years ago at his high school. We're just starting an endowment. And one of the reasons, and we're a strong school, we're full. We actually have a surplus, but no endowment. And we have a sister school about 15 miles from here, founded before us, but we're league partners and diocesan partners. They had no endowment. The clouds came to them about 10 years ago, and our enrollment started to decline. Advancement wasn't so advanced, and they closed last May. And at one point, they were an 900 student Catholic high school. Now they are gone. And their city of Taunton, Mass, which is just like our city of Attleboro, is now without Catholic high school for their kids. And that's what keeps me up at night. And it's what inspires me or energizes me to go out and get this going, because I know those schools that sustain, those schools that can survive downturns, which always come, are those that have an endowment. It could be called savings or endowment, but a rainy day fund. And so we're starting with rainy day fund, a protection. Then you grow into growth mode. If we can get past rainy day, it's okay, what can we do beyond that? But I feel like it's my number one priority is to make sure this school is much stronger than just me, much stronger than anyone here now, and that can live well beyond us. And that's what an endowment feels like to me.
Very well said. And again, this is going back to this notion of being need agnostic, of being financially resilient, right? We hear this from our founder, Scott Malpass at the University of Notre Dame, how, a lot of the school's budget is funded from the investments that he manages, right? And I think, Marco, you had some thoughts on this topic too. About what are your thoughts about being need agnostic, let's say, for a school?
Yeah, so I think again, I go back to when we first began our endowment at Bishop McNamara. We as well were very much of a turnaround story, right? We were a school that in the early 1990s had dwindled to about 200 students. After a high point in the 1980s of about 850 students, right? So very quick downturn. It was based on a variety of different factors, but the school began to grow and build a new identity when it went co-ed and have some new successes. But the idea of even having any surplus or any savings was far from our mindset. It was razor thin in those early days, but as we began to get more success, we needed to then turn our eyes towards the future, right? And to begin to save. So we got creative about, I like what Tim said, the rainy day fund, right? We initially created this just to put some surplus funds, some of our surplus fundraising. We even got a little bit creative with, we had some debt financing that we were servicing, and we restructured that debt structure and yet still committed to make the same amount of money in each payment that we were making to the debt structure, but rather than paying down the debt, we were paying towards building our savings fund. And as that number grew, then it got to the point where we said, okay, what do we want to use this for, right? And so, at what point do we want to begin drawing that 4.5% or 5% or whatever your spending policy might be? And I think you'll talk a little bit about that later on, but how would we want to use that? And for us, it was everything ranging from supporting financial aid for tuition assistance, right? We needed some capital resources. So we put together a plan that we would be able to draw annually to help us with our planned capital expenditures. It was nice to have that when we had some emergencies, when your boiler blows up or an underground pipe would burst, and you're now talking tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's nice to be able to have that access there. So then, as well, there's creative ways like endowed chairs. We had our Catholic schools particularly are blessed by having longtime faculty members, and ways to celebrate their life and their legacy, especially when you have students who've gone on to very high levels of success, who have a great appreciation for those faculty members, what a great way for them to give back to the school, to endow a faculty honor of some sort in that person's name, right? So I think you begin to think, okay, how can we begin to build this endowment and in creative ways, and really, donors, philanthropic mindset people, those people that want to give back, they have ideas already in their mind of how they want to be able to be of service, right? And so part of it is just helping to match their desire with what needs of the institution might exist.
Well said, Marco. Paulita, did you want to add anything from your perspective?
Well, I think what Marco and Tim have both described boils down to flexibility, right? When you have an endowment, you have flexibility. And in some respects, you also have the ability to be agnostic about virtually anything, right? And the way Tim said it, which is it's a rainy day fund, is a perfect way to put it. I think, some of the organizations I'm involved with, some of them in their annual budgets will have X amount allocated to something that's unforeseen, but some of them do not. And when they don't, and that emergency happens, as Marco was describing, having an endowment is a luxury, but it's a luxury that people can plan for and have it available. And then that lends to flexibility.
Definitely, Paulita. We had a client, they had a fire in the chapel at midnight 2 years ago, and thank God they had an endowment. It takes a while for insurance monies to come in and get cleared, and they were very happy that they had, like you said, an emergency fund to tap into.
Zela, can I jump in one quick
course.
point? I was on a call yesterday with 10 other heads from my diocese, a lot of them at middle schools and grammar schools, which are even typically less sophisticated than high schools. But one interesting thought we all had on that call was for a lot of Catholic schools, we're not even funding depreciation. So in some ways, if you got a new boiler 20 years ago, it's really, you're using it 1/20th per year for 20 years. And if you're not saving then, you're actually behind. You're not even, you're behind, because it's going to go in 20 years. And so for those schools that aren't doing depreciation, I think that's many, the endowment is almost, the starting point of it is, well, it's the replacement fund for your building and your boiler and everything else you have to replace every 20 years.
You're right. And that faulty wiring that I was talking about,
Yeah.
It was like from the 1950s. So it was time. You're right.
And it's predictable that it's going to go. So we need to fund those things.
You're right. Well said. So now we talked a lot about the importance of having the benefits of having an endowment. Tim, I might ask you, like, how did you get started? How do you fund an endowment? Because you're going through it right now.
I wouldn't say I would not call myself expert. We are just at the beginning. We're in a campaign that is hoping to get us established. We're not established. We're unique in that as of 6 weeks from now, we'll be our own legal entity for the first time in our school's history. We've been completely diocesan since 1961. And so now 60 years later, we're being sort of set free a little bit. We'll still be Catholic under the bishop's auspices, but our legal entity will be new and unique to us and our board of trustees. So that's the first step that allows us to really run our own ship and our own dollars. So that was an important fundamental legal step. Now it's a matter of explaining why, really telling the story that we're all telling right now to our donors and our board, and why this is an important priority. And the response has been really strong. We've talked about it in the past before the legal separation, and there was a lot of hesitation. I think folks, rightfully so, were afraid that, is that really a Feehan endowment, or is that a bishop's fund, or if something happens in the diocese, will those dollars go away? Now that we're firmly established as our own entity, or we will be in 6 weeks, those concerns are now gone, and there's a lot of confident support that's setting Feehan up for the long term.
That's great. So can we get a little bit more into the details of how you do this? Bequests, golf, galas, etc. Who wants to jump in? Marco, maybe you.
Yeah, so I guess I would say first off, yes to all of the above, right? So some of it is just disciplining ourselves to save, right? And then it's understanding an approach to advancement that's comprehensive, right? So much of I think what we're guilty of, especially in the Catholic school world, is what I like to call transactional fundraising, right? Where the kind of fundraising that we do, things like even like a golf tournament and a gala, but candy drives and some of the other things that we've traditionally done over the years is really nothing more than a transaction. And so what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to tell our stories, and we need to be able to share the stories of our current students, our faculty, staff, and our alumni. And we have to build relationships, right? We have to really learn the art and science of fundraising, which of course, in my opinion, Partners in Mission is one of the best around, if not the best around, to teach our schools how to do that, right? And so it's making a commitment. And so making that commitment to save. And then, if you are, for example, going to do a capital campaign, well, why not think about that capital campaign as a comprehensive campaign that includes a component of endowment fundraising? At the smartest business people, they recognize the value of an endowment, right? Very quickly. They see the importance of an endowment very quickly and are often very willing to support that. So, somebody's willing to make a donation, call it a $100,000 donation to a capital campaign. Maybe you ask if they would consider another 10% on top of that or 25% on top of that, whatever that comfort zone might be, to be able to make a contribution to the endowment as well. And these are the reasons why, right? This is why we need to have that endowment. So something like planning for your future building needs, you've got to have that, right? So, we identified that we would need about $150,000 a year just for routine maintenance and upgrades. So, you run those calculations, you figure out how large that endowment needs to be, and you set that goal to raise that money so that you can be able to meet those future planned needs, replacing your field, replacing your tracks, replacing your bleachers, your lighting, all that kind of good stuff, right? So I like to look at it as a comprehensive ask. So every good fundraising campaign, annual fund and capital campaigns, should include an endowment component to it. And then bequests are a big part of that, okay? Bequests, I think really learning the art of planned giving and educating our community about planned giving and the ways to give. That's again, many of our schools that were built back in the 50s and 60s, they have alumni that are reaching a point now where planned giving is probably very much in their mind. And some of the most generous gifts in the country, the research shows, have come through bequests, right? So I do think it's worth the time and effort that we can put towards educating our community about planned giving.
Paulita, I saw you shaking your head. Anything you wanted to add to this conversation? Because you being the treasurer of the Shakespeare group in Chicago, about spending levels and bequests and et cetera.
Well, I was shaking my head because Marco said it beautifully. I think the key, as he highlighted, is communication, right? I mean, Marco alluded to this, but when you ask somebody to contribute, be it to an annual fund or part of a capital campaign, and you're asking for a portion to go to endowment, you're probably already talking to people who have an affinity with your organization, who share your values, who want to contribute. Many people are already positively predisposed, if you will. And the key is, how do you tell that story in a succinct and compelling way to make it easy for them to participate in your fundraising efforts? As Marco noted, everything can feed in part into an endowment. So I don't think it's something that should be intimidating or all that difficult. Whatever any organization's experiences with fundraising, you can take that and build into that a component, which is an endowment. And the testamentary gifts that Marco referenced really are important. And, when I think of those, the messaging or the story that you're telling, because it really is a story, is to explain to people how everything that they will contribute will contribute to the organization. To the extent that you can tie the history and what you've done with the fundraising in the past to specific projects or to scholarships or to whatever it is, the more compelling that is, because you're speaking to an audience that's already open to having that conversation.
Yeah, Zela, I thought I'd again as sort of
Please.
the least experienced of our panel, I guess I'd call myself. It's really interesting to hear Marco talk about this relationship fundraising and the transition to storytelling and mission and larger gifts and more strategic gifts. In my role here, and again, 5 years in, we've been making that change. One of your biggest challenges there is local mindset. So those who've been buying bricks, those who've been going to your golf tournament, to say, we're canceling the golf tournament, but please support us with a $10,000 cash gift because you believe in the mission. That's not quite so blunt as that, but that's what you're doing effectively. And there's a lot of pushback on that. I love the golf tournament. And I'll say, yeah, we do a lot of work and we net $1,000. That's not our mission here. And we're making that change. But we've had a lot of pretty difficult conversations with good donors who don't like this change, who really don't understand it. And so a lot of our communication is around, here's our vision for how we're going to change Feehan for the long term. Please join us. And that's not easy all the time.
I know. I was thinking maybe we should spend a quick minute or two on what's the appropriate spending level and the draw. You alluded to that, Marco. I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think we have a couple of things I just want to say as we were talking about all of this. Communication has been mentioned. Trust, transparency, and proper stewardship are key, absolutely key. So there are horror stories that are out there where endowment contributions were not properly stewarded, right? They were improperly used, and so there is a prevailing lack of trust, sometimes deservingly so, about the care and stewardship of funds, right, and proper fundraising. So I say that to say that it's super critical to get policies in place, written, board-approved policies in place that deal with everything from gift naming policies to your spend allowance, how that's going to be measured, to the policy on restricted donations and how restricted funds are used or not used to be used, right? And so really super critical. And I think that the more that we can demonstrate to our community that we've got our act together, that this has been, prepared by professionals with professionals and is overseen by the board with an investment committee or an investment subcommittee, that these funds are annually audited, right? All the measures of trust and transparency and proper stewardship will lend well to the long-term financial planning of the institution. Okay, so I think that's first and foremost. In terms of the spend allowance, there's varying ways to view that. I know here, and it's very common, I think, in higher education, they use what's called a hybrid 80-20 HEPI spending policy, which helps to protect it against market fluctuations, market variations. But in essence, as I look at like the last 10 years at St. Edward's University, it's somewhere in the range of 4.5% to 5% per year is what a typical spend is. You obviously don't want to touch the principal. Of course, you could touch the principal on the unrestricted or board designated part of the endowment, but you don't want to do that, right? You've got to remain disciplined not to do that. So in general, it tends to be in that 4% to 5% range.
Great. Nice segue, Marco, to our next topic. Let's say we have the money, right? We talked about fundraising ideas. Now we have the money. What do we do next? Where do we get started? How do we invest it so that it grows and so that we're able to pay for financial aid?
Yeah, and I'm sure that you all at Catholic Investment Services I have a great response to that one, and you've got a tremendous track record over the years. I do think that forming either a subcommittee of your finance committee, so an investment subcommittee under finance and audit, is a good place to start. And it's also a great way to engage your alumni base that are involved in the financial planning industry, right? And they can help to advise on those next steps. They can help to create the policies for board approval, right? They can walk every step of the way with you. So I said, when we started, and initially we were just putting money in a money market. And then as that grew, we said, you know what, we've got to do more with this so that we can leverage it. And so we began to interview managers, right? And then we came up with a strategy where we actually had 3 funds. We have a growth fund, which we will commit to not, and that's actually board designated, but it's a board designated growth fund that we committed not to touching until it reaches a certain amount, right? And then we would access our spend policy for that. We had a capital expenditure fund that helped us to glean that money that we would need every year for the annual upgrades and annual planned expenses based on the study that we did, campus study that we did. And then we had the endowment, and the purpose of the endowment was for financial aid, right? And that's something that we were drawing and are drawing annually from in that 4.5% to 5% range.
Definitely professional management is key, right? And it's very helpful to attracting even more donors. People tend to give more if they know that it's professionally managed, and also for our purposes here, if it's managed with Catholic principles. Paulita, did you want to talk about this topic? Anything you want to add?
Sure. So, Marco talked earlier about the importance of transparency and stewardship, and the kinds of folks that could be on an investment committee or subcommittee. I find that, committee members or even board members, they don't have to be expert in this process, because to your point, Zela, and to Marco's point, you can find trusted advisors to help guide you, right? But on the idea that Marco mentioned earlier about providing a sense of comfort that the funds are going to be well overseen, that there's a sense of stewardship, that they're strong fiduciaries overseeing it. Sometimes those strong fiduciaries are very well known in the community, and it makes sense to have them on a committee, even though investing is not their expertise. And so where that leads you is that if you have a strong group of fiduciaries, some of whom may be experts, some of whom are not, you definitely want to rely on the services of people who are good investors, of firms that are good investors, of consultants who can help you achieve your goals. And I think for Catholic institutions and organizations, it's really important also to try and find those partners who are going to align with your values, that it's going to be faith-based investing. So you have very practical goals, but you can still pursue them with the principles and the values that you have. So to the extent you can find folks to share those and to help you, that is super powerful. I will say, just mention briefly, there is a lot of attention these days on ESG, and E means environmental, S means social, and G is governance. And so there are a lot of investors and donors who want their money to be invested in manners that are ESG compliant. Well, an institution, a firm like Catholic Investment Services, I would argue, has been ESG compliant since the very beginning, because it's investing with a certain set of values. And one of the things that we have learned as we have become more and more comfortable with ESG investing is that strong performance and value-based investing are not incompatible. In fact, they go hand in hand. And so there's every reason to pursue and procure sort of a financial security in the future, but there's no reason not to do that in a way that is absolutely concurrent with and reinforcing the values that your organization has.
Definitely. We were doing a webinar with Scott Malpass last week, and he was saying you either have the skills on the board, like you said, to do this yourself, or you have to hire an investment professional, right? And there are different levels of investment managers out there that you can invest with. And there are a bunch of good choices out there, but it's good to have an investment committee And we talked a little bit about that. So how do you get started? How do you form an investment committee? What are the best investment committee members look like?
Well, so I will go back to the point that Scott made in the webinar last week. So most people who serve on an investment committee don't want the responsibility of making the investment decision themselves, right? And I, as an attorney, I can't help but point out that you have a whole set of potential liabilities if you're actually involved in the decision making itself on the investments. And I think you're far better off hiring professionals and relying, overseeing them diligently so that you're really understanding what they're doing, but really relying on their recommendations. And so when I think of investment committees or board subcommittees involved in this area, it is always certainly nice if you can procure them to have a few people, maybe one or two, that have a financial background who can lead the committee or help guide the discussion. But I think that there are a few characteristics that I think are really important in terms of the people that you put on a committee like this. First of all, you want individuals who are going to be dedicated and diligent, who are going to come prepared to meetings, who care enough about the organization and are willing to spend the time to do a conscientious job. You also want people who are going to get along with the other committee members, right? Because the value of any group of individuals, whether it be in a board or in an investment committee are the diversity of perspectives and the process that results from hearing different perspectives is incredibly valuable. And so you don't want, I think, personalities who might drone out the conversation, right? And then I think you want people who are willing to come to the table, particularly in an investment committee, without their own investment biases. If you put folks on an investment committee that think that Japan is a great bet and we should have all our money in Japan, that's an issue. I think they have to leave those at the door and come to the committee with the goals of the organization in mind. And those are the only goals that should really drive the conversation and the decision making.
Well said, Paulita. And about investment committee best practices, we put together an ebook on investment committee best practices, and we're going to send that to all the registrants today. It's very well done. Hopefully you'll benefit from it. Marco, I saw you shaking your head. Anything you want to add to this discussion?
Yeah, I loved everything that Paulita just had to say. And I do think it's really important, again, to emphasize that, our investment committees are not being put together to pick funds or pick stocks. Really what we're doing is in our case, when I was at Bishop McNamara, we were picking the managers and interviewing managers and then overseeing, meeting regularly with the managers of each of these three funds that we set up. And interestingly, as Paulita was describing the ideal candidates, the people who comprised our first investment committee were probably some of the quietest members of our board, but were always well prepared and always they attended every meeting. And one was a CEO of a company, one was in the financial planning industry, another was in insurance, and one was a bond specialist. And so it was good that we had those skill sets because they knew the right questions to ask, right? They knew the right questions to ask. A question did come in, by the way, in Q&A. How long did it take Bishop McNamara to grow from $0 to $8 million? And it took about 10 years to get to that point. And I'm happy to share a little bit more at the appropriate time as to how that happened. But we had to be very disciplined about it early on. We remained disciplined to it, but we had to commit ourselves to making. Basically setting aside funds every single month that would go into the endowment and remaining committed to that. That's how we initially got started.
Tim, anything you wanted to add before maybe we can open it up to questions? I see a couple of questions that have come in. Jeremy?
Nothing to add because of my experience, but maybe I can ask the first question because I'm curious as a practitioner. We're brand new, and at what is there a size so small that committee doesn't make sense? We're not going to manage $50,000 with a committee of people, right? Or, you know, at what point is there a critical mass of 500,000 or 1.5 million when this committee structure makes sense? Is there a size that's too small for that?
It all depends, right? So you have to start somewhere, and I would say you get started right away, even at $1 million and a half. Obviously, there are different models, right? If you have a $20 million endowment, it's you have different solutions versus you're at an 80 million or $1 million, and the bigger you are.
Right.
You know, the more choices you have and the more access you have to better managers. I mean, in a way, that's sort of why we were created, is to pull assets from all of these Catholic institutions to give access to some of these great managers that you know, a $10 billion organization has access to. So so schools like you can get access to it.
Yeah.
Tim, I'll add that, you know, particularly when you begin, you could have 3 people, you could have a 5-person committee, right? I do think odd numbers are nice. You avoid tied votes. Although I will also say, I think splits in the committee are not very frequent, particularly if you've just had an ongoing conversation and everybody's in agreement as to where the mission is. But I would say just very practically going with odd numbers. And then whether it's 3 or 5 depends, you know, if you can find 5 individuals, maybe 2 of whom have expertise in the investment field, you're really asking them to serve not because the endowment is a particular size, but because they're serving your organization, right? It's another way to contribute. And if you can get that group of 5 together, that's great. If you have 3 and they're great, they're good, that's fine too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too,
like, go ahead, Marco.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. What we're trying to create in our schools, and again, Catholic schools have been particularly guilty of this for a lot of years. We need to create a philanthropic culture, right? We have to create a philanthropic culture, not transactional fundraising, a philanthropic culture. And one way to do so is to demonstrate to your public, to your constituents, that you're serious about this, right? That you've even with $0 in an endowment, if you're reporting through your annual report and through your alumni newsletters that you're creating an endowment subcommittee or an investment subcommittee, you know, we want to begin to plan for our future responsibly, and so that automatically says to philanthropists and those people who have understanding of business and business savvy, all right, I like what they're doing. They're thinking like a business now, right? They're thinking like a business. They're trying to preserve the mission. They want to make sure that Bishop Feehan's around for forever. And that's the messaging. So I think, and so in the early parts of this, you know, by engaging people, first off, you might be engaging people that could become your first contributors to that endowment, right? An old adage in fundraising is if you want money, ask for advice. If you ask for advice, you'll get money, right? So if you ask for money, you'll get advice. If you ask for advice, you get money, right? So engage people in giving you that timely advice to help get started. They may be the first contributors to this. And then you begin to tell their story, and you know, you build, if bequests start coming your way, you create a society for that, and the importance of how that contributes to the endowment, the long-term sustainable future. So I think you begin, and I agree with the odd numbers, three people probably, but it speaks volumes to your community when you get serious about planning for your future.
Thanks.
Great question, Tim. Jeremy, I see some questions coming in. Do you want to get that going, the Q&A going?
Sure. We had a question come in from the audience, a little confusion on the endowment and sort of what can be used about the endowment. So maybe I'll send this one to Paulita, and then maybe Marco, you can add in the notion of, you know, can we only use the interest that we've received? Can we use any of the capital appreciation? Can we touch the corpus? What can be used as we sort of structure the endowment, and how should the committee approach that?
Well, since you went to me first, Jeremy, let me start, and I'm sure others will jump in, particularly Marco, and supplement. So, you know, you can structure endowments in different ways, but the typical way to structure it is, as Marco and Tim had explained, sort of is a complement or a supplement to what you have in place now. and putting aside whatever guidelines or policies you have in terms of how you're managing the endowment, it is the case that the common practice is, as Marco's own endowment is managed, that you're usually not taking more than between 3.5% and 5% of that endowment in a given year. Because if you do, you start to run the risk that you're eating into the corpus, or that you're taking more than you will get in any one year. Because the way that an endowment is typically invested is you're not going to be so conservative that you're like a money market fund, right? Because at that point you might as well be in a money market fund. You're taking some risk, but you're also not going to be in the riskiest of assets. And so a 3.5% or 4% to 5% number is what you typically take in a year. And then there might be years when you decide for whatever reason you need to take a little bit more. But I tend to find that the endowments that are most flexibly structured are the most useful ones.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to differentiate between a board designated portion of the endowment versus a donor restricted endowment, right? So you know, whatever the donor restricts, those restrictions are in place and you can't violate that, right? So on the other hand, the board designated, you know, typically you'll set up some type of metric that says you'll draw that 3.5% to 5%. And if the board feels that there's a different need for those funds, it's board designated, right? The board can decide to use those funds differently. If you had to dip into the corpus on board designated endowments, you could, right? Because that's a board vote, right? That would have to go to a board vote in order to do so. So we just have to understand those donor restricted gifts are great because they always represent a personal interest that the donor has, but it's also very good and very helpful to have those unrestricted board designated endowment funds.
Yeah, and I can tell Anita that at Feehan, we now have a growing endowment. And every dollar so far has been really from our surpluses, operating surpluses. So they're all unrestricted, and we're going to tap probably almost 2/3 of them. And this may not be what Marco is recommending, but we do have a capital project coming up in 2 years. And so those savings now are going, a good chunk will go to that capital project. And we're beginners here, but because it's all in surplus earnings, it's all unrestricted.
Mm. Yeah, I chuckle a little bit because our board said to me, you know what, we can get that to $5 million, then we'll start talking about what the spend will be off of that and how this will be used. And so part of it was my own motivation to get to that number so that we could begin supporting some of the needs, especially the facilities and financial aid needs.
That's great. We had another question come in. It was really around some considerations for the grade schools or elementary schools. You know, a lot of the conversation today has been focused on high schools, college, universities, but how should endowment, how should fundraising development be sort of considered in that, you know, the elementary tier of the education system?
Yeah, you know, so I think that's, and hopefully others will have something to add to this as well. But, you know, when you're in elementary school, typically diocesan, right? So you've got some parameters and guidance around your own fundraising, and you may or may not even be allowed to grow your own endowment. Maybe it goes into the diocesan endowment. And so I don't really know how best to answer that, other than to say that if it is funds that have to go to the diocesan endowment, I think that we need to make sure that we're holding, the powers that be accountable to proper transparency of those funds. You know, we're in a world today, again, where there is sort of this lack of trust, and there's a lot of work being done by organizations like the Leadership Roundtable and others to help improve and create more transparent settings within the church, right? And so, but transparency is key. If you're going to work hard to raise the money and somebody else is stewarding that, right? Somebody else is monitoring that. I think we just need to make sure that there's proper communication and transparency.
Definitely.
Great. I know there was some talk and another question here. So we talked a lot about sort of board composition and what makes really great committee members. Paulita, maybe this one, you can start this one off. You know, what are you looking, the qualities in an investment committee chair? What's important about the chairperson, and sort of how does that sort of drive the committee's success?
Well, I think you start with one of the points that Marco made, which is the committee members and their background can actually be hugely helpful in fundraising. Not just because they would be good stewards, but to the extent that they're well respected. And particularly, as Marco said, if they also are investing in that endowment, then presumably, and if you've made them also partners in soliciting funds as part of the fundraising efforts potentially, or just to create connections that allow fundraising, it's very helpful to be able to say, well, my chair has also, contributed, or it's much more powerful if that person is making connections to say, hey, I'd like to encourage you to invest, to do X, Y, and Z, to contribute. And by the way, I've done it myself, right? So in a perfect world, the chair would be somebody who has made that commitment in addition to the time that they're going to be devoting to this, and who also has some background, if not directly in the investment world, at least maybe in the financial services industry somehow. Alternatively, it could be somebody who's just got a really prominent stature with that organization, somebody that's just going to inspire other people to give, to contribute, and who's going to be an effective advocate for the organization.
Marco, Tim, do you want to add anything? No. Couple of comments earlier about ESG and ESG principles and sort of faith aligning. Can you differentiate sort of the notion of ESG versus maybe impact investing, and sort of maybe differentiate for the audience, sort of the the nomenclature around the industry?
Sure, is that to me, Jeremy, or?
Sure, if you want to start off and maybe you
Sure. So in the US, there is not there hasn't been regulation that's coordinated on ESG. And so ESG can actually mean a lot of different things to different people. The term you used, which is impact investing, can be part of ESG, which means that as part of your investment policy or philosophy, you are looking to invest in areas where you can proactively make a change, or companies where you are trying to influence the company or the outcome. ESG investing, though, can also be as simple as avoiding securities of companies, avoiding buying stock of companies that don't align with your values. And then there's a whole swath of potential ESG investing in the middle. So impact, whether you're avoiding certain industries or companies, or whether you're looking to make an impact, all of that is considered to be part of the broad ESG umbrella. And so ESG actually carries a lot of flexibility with it. But the key, I think, and particularly in this context, is that faith-based investing, which has been around for such a long time, was well ahead of the current popularity of ESG investing.
Zela, any comments you'd like to make?
I was going to say that question, I was just reading the question for Marco about Bishop McNamara, how you went from 0 to 8 million. We started talking about it, Marco. Maybe if you have a few minutes, and then I think this might be the last question before top of the hour.
Sure, yeah. So when it was 0, when we made the commitment that this is what we needed to begin to work towards, part of what happened for us at that time is we also looked at the financial market at that time had very low interest rates. We were carrying some debt with a higher interest rate. We restructured the debt, and yet we committed to the same monthly debt service payment. And so, let's just call it $50,000 a month. And so if we were making a $50,000 a month payment, but then the restructuring occurred, and now that $50,000 was only $25,000, we still committed to paying $50,000, $25,000 towards the debt service, and $25,000 that we put into the beginnings of an endowment, to the beginnings of this fund, right? What we called the Cross and Anchor Fund, Holy Cross, Cross and Anchors, is what is the image that you see at Holy Cross colleges, schools, and universities around the world. So we called it the Cross and Anchor Fund. And then every month we committed ourselves to putting that $25,000 into the Cross and Anchor Fund. Then we began to identify who were the annual fund givers who had given for 5 years consecutively or more. And we just reached out to say, you've been, and it could be an annual gift of $25, right? It didn't really matter to us. The key was their consistency. The key was that they had made a commitment of some sort that they were going to give to the institution, and they've been doing it every year for 5 or more years straight. Mm-hmm. And we asked them, what motivates you to give? Why have you made this annual commitment to the school? How do you like to be recognized? Have you begun thinking about maybe increasing that contribution slightly, or even think about contributing to an endowment? We're forming an endowment now. How about bequest? Have you begun planned giving at all? Have you thought about the school that way? And we built some wonderful relationships, got some great advice. We ended up finding some people that served on our board and on committees like this. And so that really was the beginning. And then when we launched a capital campaign in 2014, we made it a comprehensive campaign that had an endowment component to it. So we went about meeting the needs of this capital campaign for a new structure that's in the process of being built right now, the Science and Innovation Center, endowment growth, and then capital resources for future planning, for future needs, CapEx expenditures. So, it's a plan. It begins with a plan and building relationships and then being disciplined, just like our own discipline and creating our own savings accountants and contributing to our own retirement funds for the future, right? You're doing the same thing. You're thinking like a business. Yeah. And it helps to create that philanthropic culture. And that's really, again, what we're trying to do, is to get people to understand that there is a culture of giving that we should be proud of and thankful for, so that we can help to make sure that the same opportunities that all of us received are received for future generations.
Excellent. Very well said, Marco. You should be consultant, development consultant. Tim and Paulita, any final concluding remarks? We're getting close to the top of the hour.
No, sorry, Paulita. I mean, you should go last anyway, so I'll go before you. The task force that I was on yesterday, the call I mentioned earlier, was a bunch of schools that are all in a diocese that is struggling, and our discussion began with, we've already closed 3 schools in our diocese in the last 5 years, and this task force is charged with how do we prevent that from happening again. And it's the work we do if we believe in these Catholic schools and the mission that we serve. And one of the conclusions of the call was that this very discussion, these priorities, being more business-like, more long-term, less emergency, more sustainable, that's the only solution. Going from just making it year after year means one of these years you won't, and it'll be over. And Catholic schools don't come back. Once they're closed, they're gone. So I just think this topic, this work, as difficult as it can be, is the only path to Catholic school sustainability. So I thank you for putting this together.
Very well said, Tim. Paulita, any final remarks?
We should end with Tim's comments. Those were so compelling.
You're right. I think so. I think
it's so important. They were compelling. I think it's so important to know that we don't need to be business people to conduct our schools, like a smart business. If we surround ourselves with the right people, smart business-minded people, they're the ones that will help us to achieve those goals, right? And I don't know about your background, Tim, but I was a teacher and a counselor. I did curriculum development and coaching, and then became a school principal and then a president. So certainly not really an ounce of business training. Now, over the years, you get better at it, right? And you seek out the professional development you need. But when you surround yourselves with the right group of advisors, people who have good intentions and the right backgrounds, it can work wonders for you, right? And that's really what we're talking about, is exponential growth and exponential potential for the future of our schools.
Very well said. Thanks again to a great panel for this valuable program. If you have any questions, please email us at info@catholicinvest.org. I would also like to thank Caitlin Halley for hosting us on the Zoom today. Excellent job. And we will be sending the replay to this webinar together with our ebook on investment committee best practices, which is entitled Securing the Future of Your Catholic Institution, to all registrants. Thanks for the audience for joining us today. And most importantly, please be healthy and safe. And thank you, Larry. Any final comments? Thank you.
Larry, you're muted.
Yeah, Larry, you're muted. We can't hear you. Anyway, but thank you all. Have a
Bye,
great
everybody.
afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.